Welcome back, focused learners, to another explainer. Okay, let's dive into this. How many times have you tried to, just brute force your way into a new habit? Literally white-knuckling it with pure willpower, only to find yourself totally exhausted and right back at square one. Today, we are completely dismantling that myth. We're looking at a really revolutionary approach by behavioral change specialist Shahroo Izadi. It kind of turns everything we've been taught about discipline completely on its head. Instead of harsh punishment, we're going to see how radical kindness is actually the most efficient, scientifically sound way to make a habit stick for good.
So, why does willpower always fail us? It's a question that haunts anyone who's ever been on a yo-yo diet or, let's be honest, made a New Year's resolution that completely crashed and burned by February. Look, if you've struggled with this, I really need you to hear this right now. Your failure to stick to those super rigid rules, it is not a character flaw. There is absolutely no lack of discipline here. Actually, it's a systemic design flaw, and it's built entirely on shame. See, willpower is a finite, fluctuating resource. It completely tanks when we're tired, hungry, or stressed out. So relying on it is kind of like trying to run a marathon while holding your breath. It's just destined to fail. And sadly, the diet and self-improvement industries have basically weaponized this failure against us for decades.
All right, to break free from this cycle, we've got a really clear roadmap for today's explainer. First, why diet culture fails. Second, the kindness method itself. Third, designing behavioral friction. Fourth, rewiring the inner critic. And finally, number 5, how kindness gets it done. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Why diet culture fails. Let's look at the flaw of shame and see how this all builds together.
The traditional diet and weight loss industry basically thrives on a very specific and frankly toxic business model: external control and shame. It demands that you hand over all your bodily autonomy to these rigid rules, crazy calorie counting, and just this really intense mindset of restriction and scarcity. And what happens? It creates this exhausting cycle of feast and famine that totally shatters your trust in your own physical cues. The sustainable alternative here is internal trust and body neutrality. The goal isn't to constantly judge yourself morally based on your physical form. It's about getting back to intuitive physical awareness, where you actually understand your body's needs without all that panic or guilt.
Shahroo Izadi has this incredibly powerful quote that perfectly captures her mission. She says, "I am determined to have the powerlessness and lack of trust that people have as a result of diets die with my generation." During her really extensive work with addiction, she realized something huge. Restrictive diets actually foster long-term disordered eating. Why? Because they trigger this deeply ingrained scarcity mindset. So binging, for example, it isn't a sign that you lack discipline, not at all. It's often this deep survival instinct response from your brain reacting to severe deprivation. Your body literally thinks it's starving, so it just takes over. True freedom means we have to remove those initial restrictions that trigger our primal survival instincts in the first place.
Moving right along to Section 2, the kindness method. And this is a strategy born not in some sterile lab, but from an NHS addiction specialist's own raw, lived experience.
Now, what's really interesting about this definition is that the kindness method might sound a bit fluffy, but trust me, it is anything but. It is a highly practical, incredibly strategic framework forged in actual addiction clinics by Izadi. After her own silent struggles with binge eating, and even undergoing a secret gastric band surgery that eventually required emergency removal, she had this massive epiphany. She realized she needed to apply the exact same compassionate strategies to herself that she was already using for her patients. By replacing all that harsh self-criticism with curious inquiry and really intelligent environmental design, you actually create the long-term resilience you need to keep going when your willpower inevitably hits empty.
Look at this realization. You don't need to make your body smaller to be worthy of the advice you would give to someone else. Read that again because it's absolutely crucial. You do not need to reach some specific milestone or lose X amount of weight to deserve basic human respect from yourself. We so often misunderstand behavioral change as this relentless, exhausting war against ourselves. But the truth? Treating yourself with the exact same empathy and practical support you'd instinctively give to a best friend is what actually builds psychological resilience. When you stop making self-care conditional on some future perfect version of yourself, you completely remove the desperation and self-loathing that always lead to burnout. Okay, Section 3, designing behavioral friction. Let's get into the environmental design side of things.
This right here is the mechanical process of change. Step 1, you identify the specific moments you're operating on autopilot. Like mindlessly reaching for your phone when you're stressed.
Step 2, you add intentional obstacles, or what we call speed bumps. So if you want to stop ordering fast food every night, you literally delete the delivery apps from your phone. Yes, I know it hurts, but do it anyway. Step 3, that physical friction creates vital psychological space. Think about it. It forces you to re-download the app, remember your password, type it in, and add your credit card info all over again. In those extra 2 or 3 minutes, your rational, long-term focused brain actually has the time it needs to catch up and make a conscious choice, rather than just an impulsive one.
Now, this next concept, it might honestly be one of the most profound mindset shifts in this entire explainer. Look at your behavior as a solution instead of a problem. When we get stuck in a destructive loop, our default setting is usually to respond with anger or shame, right? But what if you reframed that unhelpful habit as just a misguided solution? Every single habit, even the really bad ones, was originally adopted to solve some sort of emotional or physical problem, like a need for comfort, feeling safe, or just numbing out. By looking at the behavior as a solution, you strip away all that paralyzing shame. You realize you aren't self-sabotaging. You're literally just using an outdated tool to try and feel safe. Once you recognize the underlying need, then you can actually find a healthier way to meet it.
That brings us to Section 4, rewiring the inner critic. Let's talk about changing those toxic thoughts.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why the whole tough love approach is scientifically flawed. We often think, being really hard on ourselves is going to motivate us to do better. But harsh, cruel self-talk literally activates your body's stress response. Biologically speaking, this physical reaction effectively shuts down your prefrontal cortex, which is the exact part of your brain you need for creative problem-solving and logical decision-making. Smart love, on the other hand, creates this calm, regulated internal environment where making healthy choices just feels natural instead of forced.
So how do we actually implement this smart love? First, practice what Izadi calls militant mindfulness. This is where you curiously observe your thoughts without judging them. Second, turn that harsh critic into an objective observer. When that little voice in your head says you're lazy, challenge it. Demand real, hard evidence. Look at your past successes. Finally, empty those anxious circular thoughts right onto paper through journaling. When you physically write them down, you suddenly realize those thoughts are really just predictable biological alerts, not absolute commands. Doing this distances you from the anxiety and teaches your nervous system that, hey, it is finally safe to take up space and be seen.
Okay, but what happens when you inevitably make a mistake? Because you will. You'll hit what we call the mid-process dip. To survive this without totally spiraling into that destructive all-or-nothing thinking, firmness and kindness absolutely must coexist. Firmness means you stick to your overall commitment. You don't just throw in the towel because of one bad day. Kindness means you understand the context of the slip-up. You acknowledge that, hey, you were tired or super stressed or simply human. When someone you love struggles, you don't tell them to quit, right? You remind them of what they're capable of. You have to learn how to do that exact same thing for yourself.
Which leads perfectly into Section 5, kindness gets it done, the ultimate hack.
Imposter syndrome often stems from this lingering sense of shame about a hidden habit or an emotional struggle that feels completely out of control in private. But here is the surprising, really beautiful insight here. Managing our private habits with radical compassion inevitably seeps out into the rest of our lives. When you close that gap between your public persona and your private reality, when you treat yourself with genuine respect behind closed doors, when absolutely no one else is watching, you build this unshakable career confidence and a super powerful leadership presence. You stop feeling like a fraud because you know deep down you are operating with true integrity.
So, the crucial point is exactly this bold statement from Shahroo Izadi. Kindness gets shit done. Seriously, society so often dismisses kindness as this soft secondary virtue, but it is actually the steady, reliable fuel required for the long haul of real transformation. Shame and self-hatred, they might give you a volatile, short-term burst of energy, but they always lead to burnout. Radical self-compassion is literally the ultimate productivity hack. It allows you to become the conscious, empowered architect of your own limitless potential.
I want to leave you with this direct, pretty provocative question straight from the source material. Think about the habits you've been fighting, the internal dialogues that tear you down, and the environments that set you up to fail. What is the one conversation you have been avoiding with yourself that could be completely transformed right now by a dose of radical kindness? Really think about that. Take that question with you, apply this framework, and start engineering a life built on self-respect. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.